Genghis Khan is one of history's most polarizing figures. To some, he is a ruthless conqueror, a man whose campaigns left entire cities in ashes and millions dead. To others, he is a visionary, a leader who united warring tribes, built the foundations of global trade, and created a system of governance that shaped the modern world. The truth, as with so many great figures in history, lies in a complex spectrum, where hero and villain are not separate categories but roles that often blur together. Temüjin, the man who would become Genghis Khan, was born around 1162 into the harsh steppes of Mongolia. His childhood was not one of privilege or ease. His father was poisoned by rival tribes, his family abandoned and left to struggle for survival. Young Temüjin grew up in a world where life was brutal, where tribes constantly raided one another, and where survival often depended on cunning and strength. It was in this crucible that he developed the resilience and ambition that would later drive him to reshape the world. For his supporters, this story is the beginning of a heroic rise. Temüjin was not born into vast wealth or an established empire. He clawed his way up from nothing, relying on his wits, courage, and ability to inspire loyalty. In a land where betrayal was common, Temüjin distinguished himself by rewarding merit over aristocratic birth. He built a following not just through fear but by offering opportunities to men who had been overlooked by traditional tribal hierarchies. To the disenfranchised of the steppe, he was a liberator, a leader who offered stability and purpose. But with his rise came bloodshed. As Genghis Khan consolidated power, he unleashed devastating wars against rival tribes. His enemies were often annihilated, their people slaughtered or absorbed into his growing force. Was this villainy? To the tribes that fell before him, undoubtedly so. Whole clans disappeared from history because they chose the wrong side. Yet to those who survived under his rule, life often improved. Banditry was punished, tribal feuds suppressed, and the Mongol steppe, once chaotic, became unified under one leader for the first time. Once he had secured his base in Mongolia, Genghis Khan turned outward. His empire expanded with astonishing speed. From northern China to Central Asia, and eventually as far west as Europe and the Middle East, the Mongols carved out the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever known. His campaigns left a trail of destruction that still echoes in historical memory. Cities like Nishapur and Herat were massacred, their populations reduced to rubble and bones. Chroniclers of the time spoke of mountains of skulls left as warnings. By some estimates, tens of millions perished during the Mongol conquests. How then, can such a man be seen as anything but a villain? The answer depends on perspective. In the medieval world, conquest was often brutal, and Genghis Khan was not alone in waging wars of extermination. The difference was scale. He succeeded where others failed. Yet even amid the carnage, there was a method to his madness. Cities that resisted were destroyed without mercy, but those that submitted often flourished under Mongol rule. Trade routes were protected, taxes standardized, and religious freedom encouraged. In an age where intolerance was common, Genghis Khan's empire allowed Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, and others to coexist within the same state. Here lies the paradox: a man who could order the slaughter of a city one week could, the next, implement policies that advanced civilization. His empire facilitated the Silk Road, creating an unprecedented exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies between East and West. Gunpowder, printing techniques, medical knowledge, and even foods traveled along routes safeguarded by Mongol patrols. Without this, the Renaissance in Europe might have unfolded very differently. Was this the work of a villain, or of a hero who built bridges between cultures? His military genius is also undeniable. Genghis Khan revolutionized warfare with tactics that remain studied today. He employed speed, mobility, and intelligence gathering in ways that stunned his opponents. His cavalry moved like a whirlwind, striking suddenly and retreating just as fast. He used psychological warfare, spreading terror in advance of his armies, making many cities surrender without a fight. Yet he also valued discipline and order in an era when armies often dissolved into looting mobs. Under his command, soldiers were forbidden from plundering without permission, and spoils were divided fairly. These rules, while harsh, created one of the most effective military machines in history. But effectiveness does not erase cruelty. Entire cultures were scarred by the Mongol invasions. The Khwarezmian Empire, once a flourishing Persian state, was obliterated after a trade mission from Genghis Khan was executed. His revenge was absolute: cities razed, populations enslaved, and fertile lands turned to wasteland. To Persians, he was a demon from the steppes. To Russians, whose cities were burned and whose princes humbled, he became the terror that haunted generations. Even in China, though he laid the groundwork for the Yuan dynasty, his campaigns left untold suffering. And yet, the Mongols also became great patrons of culture. His descendants, especially under the Pax Mongolica, promoted learning, art, and science. They connected distant civilizations, allowing Marco Polo and others to travel across Asia. They transmitted knowledge that reshaped the medieval world. If Genghis Khan had not existed, would such connections have been possible? Perhaps, but not in the same way or with such speed. There is also the question of his personal character. Unlike many rulers of his age, Genghis Khan was not decadent. He lived simply, dressing like his soldiers, sharing in their hardships. He promoted people based on loyalty and competence, not on noble lineage. Women in Mongol society enjoyed more freedom than in many contemporary cultures, and Genghis Khan valued the counsel of his mother and wives. Compared to many medieval kings, he seemed pragmatic, even modern in his outlook. For his followers, this made him a hero, not just a conqueror. Still, no amount of admiration for his leadership can erase the devastation he caused. Historians debate whether his campaigns led to the deaths of 30 million, 40 million, or even more. Whole regions, particularly in Central Asia, took centuries to recover. Irrigation systems were destroyed, cities abandoned, populations scattered. The scars of his conquests remained long after his empire fragmented. Can a man responsible for such suffering ever be called a hero? The answer may be that Genghis Khan was both. He was a hero to his people, the Mongols, who saw in him a leader who gave them unity, purpose, and prosperity. He was a villain to his enemies, whose lives and cultures he crushed without mercy. He was a visionary who created a system of laws, promoted trade, and encouraged tolerance, and he was a tyrant whose wrath could wipe entire civilizations off the map. He was not one thing or the other, he was both, existing in a spectrum that defies simple judgment. In the end, history often paints in broad strokes, labeling figures as good or evil. But the story of Genghis Khan reminds us that reality is more complex. His legacy is not just measured in the destruction he wrought, nor in the innovations he fostered, but in the tension between them. He was a man of his time, but also a man who transcended it, shaping centuries of history that followed. So, was Genghis Khan a hero or a villain? The truth is that he was both, depending on where you stand. To a Mongol horseman in the 13th century, he was a father of the nation. To a Persian villager watching his city burn, he was the embodiment of hell. To us, centuries later, he is a reminder that power often comes with paradox, and that greatness and brutality can inhabit the same man. Perhaps the most accurate label we can give him is not hero or villain, but force of history, a storm that reshaped the world, leaving behind both fertile soil and barren deserts. And in that spectrum, we find not an answer, but a lesson. History is rarely simple, and those who change the world most profoundly often do so with hands stained in both creation and destruction.